Hello, everybody. Welcome to our University Readiness Seminar, webinar. Very excited to have everybody here. And we're just going to start the screen sharing in a moment, I believe. But while we're waiting for everybody to arrive, it's just 7 o'clock now. I would love it if you would take a moment and put into the chat the ages of the children, students, emerging adults, young adults that you have in your life, the people that you're specifically thinking about for this seminar. Some of you I know have students or children that are in the middle of high school, edging towards the end of high school, and we have others that are really in the grade 12 year and are making the transition, and some other families with us that have already made that transition and they've got kids in first year and they're looking to support them in a different way. So it would be terrific if I could have a better understanding of who's here, and then I can speak directly to those needs. So far, I've got some nice chat activity. Excellent. So Girish says 17-year-old in grade 12. Daphne says 16-year-old in grade 12. Patrick says 17, 16, and 15. Oh my goodness, that has got to be a busy household, Patrick. So that's grade 10, 11, and 12. And Tal says 16, grade 11. Excellent. So far, we've got those last two, the senior years. 18 in, Candace says 18 in first year and a 15-year-old in grade 10. So you've got one on one side and one coming up, getting ready for that transition. Ben says a 16-year-old, and Girish also has a 15-year-old in grade 10. Wonderful. Oh, this is so exciting. We've got a nice cluster of ages. So I think that, the way that we've structured tonight will be really valuable to each of you, because we're looking at things that a person can do proactively, as well as things that they can do while their kids are sort of in the middle of that transition as well. Brenda says 17-year-old in grade 12. Excellent. Got a lot of grade 12s, 11s and 12s. This is good. Really, really good. All right. I'm going to, Joelle, I'm going to ask you to share the screen, and we're going to get started. And a few people I'm sure will join us, will trickle in, but I want to take a moment, a pause. And I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Ruth Rumak. I am the Executive Director of Education and the founder of Ruth Rumak's Learning Space. We are an academic center. We work with students of all ages, all the way from grade 1 all the way through to the end of high school and into that university undergrad realm. And we are no stranger to transitioning students, to getting them ready to go, not just from primary to junior school to intermediate or high school, but really that big transition between high school and university. So we put together this University Readiness webinar for you as parents to both educate yourselves, hopefully take some strategies and some new tips with you at the end of it, but as well to give your kids, the people that are around you that you're thinking of for tonight, some tools and strategies so that they can make that transition in the easiest way possible for them. So I'm going to just set a few ground rules, a little bit of administrivia, I like to call it. First, we are going to have a chance to answer questions. I will have some very designated times for questions as we end a particular section, as well as I have some wonderful questions that you all sent in ahead of time, which is wonderful. I love to get questions ahead of time because it gives me a chance to think them over and come up with some good resources for you. So we will be getting to those as well. And if you do have questions as we go along, you can put them in the chat, but I will be looking at them sort of as a whole when we get to the end of the area or that domain, that content. All right. I don't think there's anything else we need to say. Let's get started. Oh, that's me. So as I said, I am the founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumak's Learning Space. And the way that our center works is very different from a typical tutoring center, let's say. First of all, we have a direct instruction pedagogy, which means that we really work with our students primarily one-on-one or in very small groups. And all of our teachers are Ontario certified teachers. They have a whole host of experience working on a variety of subjects, but more importantly, with a variety of learners and learning needs. And one of our specialties is definitely working with students who have particular learning needs, those who have been identified as learning exceptional, with learning differences or learning challenges. And our teachers are very well versed in how to break things down into very small pieces and then build them back together so that a student not only gains information, but skill. And the way that we do that is through a multimodal, multisensory approach, which means that we like to get our kids active. It's not just sitting there doing paper pencil work. And in this virtual world, which we have been in for quite some time now, we were able to make that transition quite smoothly, actually, using some brilliant assistive technology and interactive whiteboards. And our amazing group of teachers have come together to create lessons that are just as engaging in person as they are on the computer or virtually. So I'm really proud of our team for that. And as I was saying earlier, we work with a lot of students in high school. We work with a lot of students who are making that transition to university. And we found that there was almost a lack of information. There's a lot of information that the schools give out, that the guidance counselors have at their disposal, but nobody has enough time to sit down and give our kids a really thorough understanding of what's coming up for them and how to make that transition successful for them. So let's go to the next slide. I think I'm jumping ahead of myself. As usual, I just get very excited and I jump right in. Let's talk a little bit about this unusual time. And we know where we're at. We're still in the middle of this COVID situation. And we know that the last 2 school years have been extremely challenging, both on the academic side and on an emotional side for everybody, teachers, students, families, parents, everybody included. And now to add to that, we have a bunch of kids who are transitioning from high school, having spent the last 2 years of high school online or off and online, and now moving into a realm where they're not quite sure what university is going to look like. It's certainly not going to look like what their parents may have experienced when they moved on to university, and it could change. So it could change from the first term to the second term to the last term. Lots of uncertainty. And one of the things that we want to really honor with our students and our children is to really understand where they're coming from and understand that it's different than the experience that we had. And it may, as I said, change for them throughout their university career, especially if they're starting this year or next year or the year after that. All right, let's look at the next slide. So let's see. The transition. I love this meme. It says, we ask 18-year-olds to make huge decisions about their career and financial future, when a month ago, they had to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. So true. It is so true. And I think that as we make this transition, the best way to help our kids along is to prepare. And in my experience, the more prepared a person is, the less anxious they are. It's like, preparedness goes up, anxiety goes down, and it works the same way for the opposite. So if you are less prepared, your anxiety is higher. And for different individuals, that means different things. Some people need things to be so uber prepared that they know exactly what's coming up and they've rehearsed it in their head and they've seen it all laid out in front of them. And other people just need to have a general idea of what they're walking into. So one of the things that we talk about in terms of preparing for this transition is the gradual release of responsibility. And when I talk about the gradual release of responsibility, I'm talking about us as parents stepping back a little bit at a time. It helps if we can start this process earlier rather than waiting till the last few months before they're off to university or, September of year 1 of university. But to be proactive and to set some boundaries for yourself as a parent to know, okay, I'm not going to jump in and do this for my kid, but I am going to give them the tools to do it on their own. I'm going to walk them through it. I may have to walk them through it 2 or 3 times, but I'm going to walk them through it until they feel comfortable and they're telling me to back off. So I think it's partly a conversation to have with your emerging adults, and also a conversation to have with yourself to say, okay, where do I need to step in and where can I step back? So the best piece of this puzzle for success, for transition success, is really the idea of academic preparation and emotional preparation. And we're going to talk about both of those aspects today in our webinar. All right, let's move on. Academic skills. So we're going to talk about strategies for success. So we can move on to the next slide. Our approach at Ruth Rumak's Learning Space is to look at the big picture. And when we work with our students, and we work with them both one-on-one or in a small group, as I said, we noticed that there was a lack of information. There was a lack of consistency and proactive work leading up to this transition to university, where there was a lot of talk about you need to do this and you need to do that, and you have to be prepared here, and you've got to be, a good note taker, and you've got to be organized, and you've got to know how to manage your time. There was a lot of stuff thrown at our kids, but there wasn't a lot of time spent honing those skills in a systematic way. And so we created the University Readiness course. It's a group class that we run throughout the year, different times throughout the year. And what it does is it takes all of the things that we have found as sort of red flags, or the things that made the students most anxious, or the things they were most concerned about, and we boiled it down into a 10-hour course. And in that course, we are looking at how do you set yourself up for success as a student, and you want to be introduced to some new strategies and techniques in order to make that transition smoothly. So on this slide, we have a ton of things. These are just actually a little piece of what we go over in the class, or what we go over with our individual students. And of course, I don't have time to go over them all tonight, but I have chosen a few of them that I think are very important. And I'm hoping to share some new strategies with you that you can implement at home and share with your children, and help them to start practicing these things, some things that maybe they haven't thought about before. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So the first thing we're going to talk about is decoding the syllabus or syllabi. And all university courses, all college courses, and some high school courses, some teachers are starting to do this with their students as well. All courses have a course outline, but a syllabus is often much more detailed and gives you a whole host of information. And again, depending on the professor or the instructor, it will run the gamut from something that is super detailed, like a 25-page syllabus that you're handed on the first day, or that you have to print out on your own, to a 2 or 3 page overview of what you're going to be doing. And the interesting thing about the syllabus is that it's going to have some general information. You're going to know, what who to find, who to talk to, who your professor is, who your teaching assistant is, perhaps their office hours. You're going to know generally some dates that you're going to have to be present for, in terms of testing dates and assignment dates. It really just depends on what how the professor likes to do it. Now, the thing that I find most interesting is that most kids take that syllabus, they put it in their bag or their binder, and it stays there for a really long time, until they may find themselves in a situation where they aren't sure what the reading is for the next week, or they think they have an assignment due, but they're not quite sure. And then they'll dig through their stuff to find this really important piece of paper. And we teach our students that syllabus is like gold. It's like a gold nugget, and you want to hold on to it. You want to put it in a place of priority so that you know where it is all the time. And on top of that, you want to take the time to go through it so that you have a really good understanding of what that professor is looking for in their class, and what their focus is, and how you can be most active and most productive in their class. So part of our course, we actually sit down with some real syllabi that we've gathered over the years, and we go through it page by page, section by section. We look at different types. We look at, we can actually, let's click to the next slide. I'm going to show you some more examples. Here's an example of a few different. So one has the course information. It's all very clearly laid out. It's really detailed. You'll see here in the middle example, there is a chart, or there's something that shows you what your evaluation is based on. So, and then the other one has a term, and it's just a document chart. Now, the interesting thing is that we're all different types of learners, and we all have different strengths, and we all gather information and process information in different ways. So for a student who is overwhelmed by a lot of text, that 25-page document is going to be really overwhelming, and they're not going to want to sit through and look at it detail by detail, but it's still really important for them to do it. So what we recommend is that if they want to do it with somebody else, they want to do it as a group, with a few people in the class, or with a parent, or with a support worker. One of the most important things is to take the most important information from that document and put it on your own document, whether it's sort of a one-page overview, or you're taking those important dates, test dates, evaluation dates, assignment dates, and you're transferring them to a calendar. Calendars are our friends, and we have to make friends with our calendars, either whether they're digital or they are paper-based. I am old school. I prefer a paper calendar, even though I work in a digital calendar and I've got all my days lined out and my events planned out on digital calendar. At the beginning of every week, I actually write out my paper calendar, because I like to refer back to it, and I really like the satisfaction of crossing something off. So for somebody who is a visual learner, something like the pie chart is really helpful, because they can see visually, it's color coded, and they can see how much of each thing is going to be weighted for their evaluation or their class mark. And then for a learner that prefers things in more of a linear fashion, bullet points, things that are in small chunks, the third example may be easier for them to digest. However your child learns best, we need to accommodate for that. They need to know about that for themselves and make those accommodations for themselves. So taking the information from one form and moving it into the other. However they do it, it needs to be done in a way that they can access it and they understand and have a functional document that they can refer back to. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So another huge part of being successful and making this transition successful is the organizing and prioritizing. And we talk about it. I mean, we do a whole bunch of work on an executive functioning skills. And if you're interested, there is an executive functioning skills webinar coming up later in the year. Check our website, because we give lots of tips and tricks for that as well. But the skill of being organized and understanding how to prioritize something is just that. It's a skill. And it's a skill that is associated with our executive functioning skills. And those are things that take place in the frontal lobe. And one thing I like to remind parents, and myself as the parent of both a 12-year-old and a 29-year-old, is that these executive functioning skills don't develop fully until about age 25. And if you have a child who has focus and attention issues or executive functioning challenges, it's going to be even longer. And we have to have patience, and we have to remember that these things will take time, but they can be learned. And when we're learning and we're teaching executive functions, how to do things like break down an assignment into smaller pieces so that it gets done in a timely manner, how to figure out what the priority is, and how to pace yourself. I think that's one of the biggest things we hear from our students who are now transitioned into university. The pacing is really challenging, because university starts out slowly. Your first couple of weeks, frosh week, you're getting excited, you're meeting new people, you're partying. I mean, even though we're supposed to be in social distance times, there are still lots of social engagements going on, and we do encourage our students to get involved. We're going to talk about that later. But it becomes an avalanche. And what starts out slowly really ramps up towards, let's say, the first, second, third week of October. And by November, you're halfway through your term. So when we want to talk about priorities, we want to give our students a tool. And the next slide is going to show us just that. There it is, our priority matrix. So this is something that we use with our students all the time. I use it myself if I'm feeling overwhelmed with a lot of things to do. It's something we are actually going to be giving you a handout. We'll be sending out a handout at the end of the presentation. And that is one of the handouts so that you'll have it on hand as well. So let's take a look at this. This matrix has 4 quadrants. And we have going, from top to bottom, we have an urgent and a not urgent. And then along the side, we have an important and a not important. And this is one of the tools that you can use with your kids. You can practice it ahead of time. You can use it in university. You can use it in high school. You can use it in middle school. It's used for any time that you need to sort of sort out what really needs to be done first. And remembering that human nature allows us or encourages us to usually do the thing that we think is either going to be the easiest or the thing that we like doing the most. But that's not necessarily the thing that you should be doing first. So this helps us to understand and really use our metacognitive skills to break that thing down and decide where it belongs on the matrix. So let's look at the first box. First quadrant is something that is important and urgent, which means that it is time sensitive. And if I were using this with a student, I might practice first just on what does their week look like? Not even looking at one particular assignment, but looking at all assignments. So what does your week look like? What are the things that you cannot change that are time sensitive? So that could be things like preparing for a test because it's happening on Tuesday. It could be, doing a reading that is due on Wednesday. It could be an appointment that you have that you have to prepare something for. So that urgent and important is time sensitive. You got to do it first thing right now. Then we move on to it's still important to do, but it's not as urgent. It's not as time sensitive. That's the thing that we're going to do next once we've worked out all of the important and urgent aspects. Then we can move down to the bottom where it's still urgent because there's maybe some time sensitivity to it, but it's not happening today or tomorrow or the next day, but it's not as important. Those are things that you could either do later in a day or maybe not at all that day. Maybe that gets shifted to your list for the next day. And then the last quadrant is not important and not urgent. And that's what we're going to do when we've finished everything else and when we have a spare moment. Now, as I said, it's usually that bottom quadrant is the one that we want to do first because it's probably the most fun or the most enjoyable or the thing that we think is going to be easy. But we have to train ourselves to kind of flip that around and really look at the priority of it, the importance and the urgency and how those things work together. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. So here's another big part of being successful in your university years and in the end of high school years is another method of time management. How do you organize your time? So if we've used that priority matrix to determine what's important and what we have to get done, we now need something to capture all that information and know when we are going to do these specific tasks. So there's a tool called Trello. It's an online tool. And it is basically, you can see the 2 pictures. I have sort of the manual version, which is the sticky notes and a calendar where we're color coding things and we're putting different priority levels in different colors or different subjects in different colors. And we're using the sticky notes on the calendar. Easy way to do it. For me, I find it very annoying when the glue starts to dry up and then all my sticky notes start popping off the paper and I can't remember what I have to do first. So that's where the digital part comes in. And something like Trello is color-coded and has different levels of complexity. You can move things from day to day. You can scratch things off. You can add pictures. You can do a whole bunch of things to organize your time. And when we work with our students, we do a mock calendar or a mock organizational tool where we'll give them a whole bunch of different things that somebody might have in a week or a series of days. And we get them to practice prioritizing and then figuring out how they're going to spend their time. One of the things that I think our emerging adults forget sometimes is that it's not just the work that they have to do, what that the assignment has asked them to do or what the professor has asked them to do, but you also have to build in time to your schedule for eating, for exercising, for being social, any other appointments that you might have. And when you start to add in all of these real life components along with all the assignments and the readings that you have to do, it can become overwhelming. And that's where we want to take that step back and use some of these tools to organize it and to really have a good bird's eye view of what your day, week, month, term is going to look like. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. I love this. Okay, here is another method of time management. So if we have used the priority matrix and we know what we have to do and what's priority, and we've used some kind of a calendar, either digital or manual, and we've laid it all out so we know when we need to do it, the method of time management called the Pomodoro technique is the third piece of the puzzle, which tells us how to do it or how to use the time well. And this method is a method of working for 25 minutes at a time, and then taking a 5-minute break, and then doing another 25 minutes of work and a 5-minute break, and then additional 25 minutes if you can, and another 5-minute break. Most people will work well if they want to sort of squeeze 2 Pomodoros together. Pomodoro can be used to determine an amount of time. So if you want to take 2 Pomodoros and take a longer break, you would take 50 minutes of work and a 10-minute break. The most important thing about this method is that it is research-based. It comes out of a lot of research, I believe, from Italy, which is why it was called the Pomodoro method. And the idea behind it is that when you take a short break and you take a brain break, you are actually kind of rejigging the way that your brain is working. And when you come back to the work 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, you are refreshed and you're able to then carry on for another period of time. Generally, okay, so this slide says to repeat it 4 times. I think you have to really look at your own focus and ability. And when you take your breaks, you want to really take meaningful breaks. And I think we're going to talk about that next. Let's take a look at the next slide. So brain breaks are, again, scientifically researched. There's a lot of, neuroscience behind what type of break you should take and how you should take your breaks. So we like to recommend something, if you've been doing a reading or research or you are working on an essay, you want to take a break that's different than the same mode. So taking a break and playing video games, not such a good idea. Taking a break and doing a Sudoku or an actual jigsaw puzzle where you're using a different part of the brain, or a crossword puzzle is still using the brain, but it's now activating different parts of the brain, which will give the part you were using a break. And of course, we really recommend those active physical breaks, taking your dog for a walk, going and shooting some basketball hoops, just doing jumping jacks or walking up and down the stairs 10 times, because even that for 5 minutes is going to refresh and reset the body and the brain and allow you to come back and be more focused and get more done, be more productive overall. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. So here's a thing that we know exists: distractions. And they are everywhere. They are, like I'm sitting at my desk and I have my phone and I have my laptop and I have my desktop and I've got a whole bunch of other things around me. And our kids have even more. I remember walking into my daughter's bedroom during lockdown. She's 12, she's in grade 7 this year, so 6 last year. And she had her desktop open with the Zoom. Then she had a laptop open with a private Zoom with her friends so that she could see her friends individually. And then she had her phone on the side where she was scrolling through some other information. And I sort of stopped for a moment, scratched my head going, how does she do this? Is she actually being able to focus on any one thing well? And again, the brain science tells us, no, not really. We are not really able to focus on all of those things well. We think that we are good at multitasking, but the truth is that when we really want to get something done, it is best to shut down those other distractions and make sure that we have our full attention on the thing that we are trying to do. Now, there is other research that says, playing music in the background or chewing gum actually helps focus. And those can be true. But I'm looking at the kids who have 4 or 5 different devices going on at the same time and are bouncing around from one to the other. And I would say that the research suggests that it's not the best idea, and that we need some help in managing those distractions. So here are a couple of suggestions that you can share with your kids, or maybe you want to use for yourself. Something like, let's see, stay focused. And now I am forgetting the name of the other one with the trees. Forest. It's called Forest. See, I'm already distracted. Haha. Okay, so Forest is an app that you can put on, and basically it helps you count down the time. So you're going to work for 25 minutes, you put the timer on, and when you reach that, and it blocks other social media and other sites from coming up so that you can concentrate and you're not moving off of whatever site you're on. Stay focused is very similar. It's a time wasting, it blocks the time wasting things like Facebook and Twitter, and it helps you to stay away from those for a certain period of time. And it also says you can set it so that you can say, I want to have 45 minutes of Facebook time today. So once that 45 minutes is up, that's it. You can't access that website again or that app again until the next day. There are many others. These are just 2 that we pulled up that we recommend to our students and that we use on our computers when we're in the office. A really simple way of doing it is just put your devices out of sight. Like put them down, put them in a drawer, close the drawer, and take those 25 minutes to super concentrate on what it is that you're doing. It's hard. It's really hard. And in fact, there's a lot of research that students and individuals, people, not just young people, but older people who are so dependent on their devices actually feel anxious when they don't have them. And it's something good to practice with your students, with your kids. That is, okay, we're just going to take 10 minutes. We're going to put it away. Everybody's going to put it away, and we're just going to talk or play a game, or do a board game or a card game or something that does not have to do with screens. The other suggestion that we have, and this, some of these suggestions come from Dr. Chavoshi. He is the clinical director at the PsychoEd Clinic. He was on our last webinar for University Readiness, and he gave us some great tips. I'm going to share some of them now. Another one is to use separate user accounts for your work or your schoolwork and your leisure, your play, or to use a completely different device for your schoolwork and for your play, so that when you're doing your research and you're on your school stuff, you're not actually tempted to be distracted because you don't have those things on that device, and vice versa. When you're playing, play, and when you're working, work. All right, let's move on to the next one. So I'm zooming through this because there are so many things that I want to share with you. And I do promise you, I will give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. We're almost at the end of this particular section. So hang on, if you've got questions, just hang on to them for just another minute. So university is a big change. You're going into often lecture style. One of the things we didn't talk about at the beginning was what does university look like, or college, post-secondary look like right now? And it looks very different in different institutions. So, I've got a list together of different institutions right now. University of Toronto is in person, and they are planning to return to mostly in-person classes, but of course they're restricting social gatherings. So U of T is pretty much in person. McMaster is a hybrid where they're doing some online courses and some some in-person courses. We have most of the universities, University of Ottawa, Western, Waterloo, those are all hybrids right now. I know that Queen's is in person and Guelph is in person, but York and Ryerson are also hybrid. So every institution is doing their own thing, and certain programs are more on the in-person side and other programs are not. And it really depends on the program that your child is in or going into. And of course, we don't really know what that looks like for next year at all. So we have to be flexible and we have to give our kids these skills to be successful no matter which situation they find themselves in. So let's talk about note taking, because that's a huge part of university. And it's, again, something that I think our teachers at the university level, they're not teaching how to take notes, but at the high school level, our kids haven't really been taught how to take notes either. It's just an expectation. We assume that our students know how to take proper notes. So that's one of the things that we teach explicitly, which is what are some different note-taking techniques? One of the things that I know, again, from a lot of brain research, is that handwriting your notes actually is more beneficial for long-term memory because it creates stronger neural connections as you write out your notes. And I'm actually talking most about handwriting, cursive, that we have the best recall from what we write down if we use cursive writing, a little less recall when we use printing, less recall when we use typing, and so on and so forth. So our best, let's say, tip for remembering what you've written down is to handwrite it, whether it's cursive. Most kids don't know how to write cursive anymore, but at least to handwrite it, or do your first version of notes perhaps typed and then your second version of notes handwritten so that you're committing those concepts to memory. There's more time for the brain to engage with that material when you are handwriting it. So one of the ways that we teach handwriting notes, traditional note taking, is using something called Cornell Notes. And you can see an example of it here. It's a very structured way of taking notes. You can use it for a lecture. You put your name, you put the topic that's being discussed, you put the date, you put what subject it comes from. In the middle section on the left side are the main ideas. So you're just going to point form what the main ideas are of the lecture or the reading. This can be used for both reading, research, note taking, as well as making notes for your lectures. And then your notes go in the middle. Those are the bigger, the more details. And then you want, this is the key, is that at the end of doing that, you want to create a summary, which could be bullet points, could be a full paragraph, but you want to take those main ideas and the details and create a summary for yourself. Now imagine if a student is actually doing this consistently throughout their readings, and they have 5 readings to do per week. And at the end of the week, they have this beautiful page of notes and a paragraph or bullet point summary at the end. Imagine how much easier that makes studying for the test or the exam come the end of the term, if you've been doing this consistently throughout the term. So again, it's one of those little things that we can teach students to do and practice ahead of time so that they're ready to do it and they find their comfort zone in making it work for them. So this is on the traditional side. Let's take a look at the technology-based side. Okay, this is gonna blow your mind. If it doesn't blow your mind, then talk to me afterwards because I'll have to think of something better. So generally, when we talk about technology-based, we're looking at laptops. Everybody's got laptops in their lectures. Many high school students take their laptops to class. Kids are super good typers. They're accurate. They're fast. Maybe they're not so accurate, but they're fast. And they have a way of getting their information down quickly. Okay, that's a good start. What if you are not such a great typer? Or what if you have a challenge with actually listening, processing information, and writing your notes at the same time? So one option is to take an audio recording. And of course, if you have an IEP or you have a particular learning challenge and it's been diagnosed, the universities, and we will talk about this later, will have lots and lots of accommodations and support services for you or your child. one of the things that you have to have permission before you record anything in a lecture, you do have to have the professor's permission. So that's just an aside. But let's say you have permission. You can audio record the lecture, and then you can use an app like Otter. It's a free app, or you can upgrade for a small fee. And that will transcribe the audio recording. And they're quite good. I've used them myself, and they're quite accurate. But if you want to go to the next level, there's something called the Live Scribe Pen. And this is a picture of it. And you can see there's a notebook. It's a special kind of paper. And on that particular pen, there is a writing stylus, so ballpoint ink at the bottom. There is a microphone at the top. And there is also a camera in there somewhere that kind of takes a picture of where you are on the page. It knows where you are on the page. So you turn on the Live Scribe Pen, it's recording the audio of the lecture, and you are writing your notes by hand. You don't even have to write in words. You could just write one word or a symbol. You could write a star on the page at a certain point where a professor is telling you what's going to be on the next exam. So you put a star and you say exam info. And then when you upload the information back to your computer, if you touch the pen on the paper where you made that symbol, it will automatically jump to the place in the audio recording. And it can also transcribe that audio recording so that you have it for you in one package. So it's complicated, but not so complicated. But it's really amazing for individuals who have a hard time listening and taking notes and processing the information all at once. I'm hoping I'm blowing your mind. If I've blown your mind, please put it in the chat. If not, say, better luck next time. Okay, let's take a look at our next slide. So before we go on, I want to field some questions. So let's go to the chat. Oh, Patrick says impressive. Thank you, Patrick. You validated me. Thank you so much. Somebody else, Tal, says very cool. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it is cool. It's really not just cool, but it's actually such a game changer for some students who really have that difficulty in taking in all that information and processing it quickly. And it can make the difference between failing a course, just passing the course, and actually excelling in the course. And if you are interested in more assistive technology, we have a webinar about that coming up later on in the term as well. So stick around for that. I thought Rocket Books were good supports. You know what? Yeah, give me a little more information about Rocket Books. Do I know about Rocket Books? Maybe I know them under a different name. Okay. If you want to put in some more information, Patrick, I'd love to know more about Rocket Books. Let's talk a little bit. Any other questions about this whole academic preparation? As I said, this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the areas that we want to be working on with our kids and getting them prepared. The note-taking is so huge. The time management and prioritizing, learning how to use your time well is huge, as well as that, just the understanding of what is expected of me and how am I going to live up to those expectations and working backwards from there. Any other questions before we move on? Any comments? Let's do that. How about, if you put in there one thing that you might take away from the first part of this information. I love comments. It makes me feel like I'm not talking to a void. All right, we'll give you a moment to do that. If you can think of something, if there's anything that stood out for you, I would love to know it. Let's take a look at the next piece. Okay. Mental well-being. Oh my goodness. This is huge, right? This is huge. It's huge for us as parents as our kids go off to university. That transition can, I think, sometimes be more difficult for us as parents than it is for our kids to truthfully. And it's sort of like you get to these milestones. I remember my daughter transitioning from, nursery school into kindergarten, and that was a big deal. And then moving from middle school into junior, or from primary school into middle school, and soon she'll be transitioning out to high school. And My son, of course, who's been through it all at this point, watching him go through those stages, and it's hard because we have taken on certain roles as parents and we get comfortable in our roles. But of course, as our children transition into this new phase of their lives, we have to transition as well. And I like to talk about the gradual release of responsibility. And that is the idea that we're not abandoning our emerging adults. We're not saying, well, you're 18 now, you're off at university, you're on your own, take care of yourself, let me know if things go terribly wrong. We do want to make sure that we are giving them skills at the appropriate times and that we are there to support them in any way that we can and the ways that they need. Part of that is having some conversations with your kids and having the conversation about, what do you need from me? What do you need from me right now to support you so that you can be most successful? And I think sometimes those conversations are really difficult, but sometimes, you can find a quiet moment. You're on a long drive, or you are taking the dog out for a walk, or you take your kid out for a, hot chocolate or a coffee, and you just have that moment where you can actually have an adult conversation about them becoming more independent and adults. So again, gradual release of responsibility is not hands off. It's taking appropriate steps back, little steps back at a time, and giving your students the practice and the tools to be able to do things for themselves. The other piece is these developing new parameters with your emerging adults. So, instead of making the phone call to make their dentist appointment for them, because that's what you've always done, hand them the phone number, text them the phone number and say, you know what, your appointment, you should be making an appointment sometime in August. Here's the number. Make sure you do it. The bigger piece of it, I think, is being able to support our kids without judgment. And that's a hard one. That's a really hard one, I will admit. I have expectations for my kids. I've worked hard to give them these opportunities to allow them to become better people. And yeah, I have some high expectations in certain situations. But I also have to remember that at this point, they're starting to make decisions that will impact their futures, and that it is their future. It is not my future. And my role at this point is to be there as a sounding board, as a support system, as a resource. But I can't necessarily and will not be able to tell them what to do forever. So it's good to start practicing that early. And when we say support without judgment, it doesn't mean that we have to keep our feelings and our opinions necessarily completely to ourselves. It's really all in the way that we share them. And, you can use phrases like, well, if I were in the situation, I might think about it this way. Or, I've been here and this is what I did. And this is what came out of it. These were the pros in my situation. These were the cons. And starting to have that dialogue, I think is super important as well. Okay, let's look at the next one. Next slide. All right, so this is a big question because we are sending our kids off into the world. We and the universities, let me say, do not like parents phoning on behalf of university students. The university looks at that university student as their own entity, and may or may not share information about the student with you, regardless of whether you're paying for the university education or not. It's something that the university is saying the student has to take responsibility. And so we're not going to, I'm the professor, I'm not going to tell you, mom, what your child has been doing in this class before the student comes to me and has that conversation. So how do we know if our kids are struggling if we can't get the information from them? Some of the signs that we want to look at, and especially as we're making this transition, as we were saying before, throughout a time of some truly increased anxiety and increased depression. And there are lots of statistics that are telling us that our youth have been suffering through this pandemic. Some things would be, withdrawal or pulling away. Now, I want to caveat a lot of these. This isn't an exhaustive list, and this also isn't is some of these can actually just be teenagers asserting their own independence. So we have to take it with a grain of salt, and we have to look at the context in which it's happening. Some of these things could be a loss of interest in things that they previously enjoyed. You know, if they were part of a club or a sports team and they're suddenly not showing up to practices and they're not enjoying themselves in that way anymore, we want to pay a little bit more attention. Discussions or comments that are hopeless or really have a negative outlook, a very uh, end of the world type of outlook, can be problematic and challenging, and we want to be aware of that. Extreme changes in emotions or in appetite, as well as, you know, an overabundance of sleeping or sleep problems. Again, some of these things are teenage related, and some of these may be signs of something deeper. So we want to pay attention and keep having conversations. I would also say that we want to look at the stress levels and their ability to cope, because having high stress doesn't necessarily mean that they can't cope, or that they are going to, you know, crash. Having high stress but having some really strong coping mechanisms, having a meltdown once in a while is super normal. It's very natural, but it's an ongoing meltdown, and the inability to get yourself out of it. That's what we're looking for in terms of warning signs. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So that's how will you know, some signs. So what do we do as parents when our kids are melting down and our kids are feeling like they can't go on, and that, you know, that they're in over their heads? I think the first thing is to really validate their feelings. And to say, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and I can see that this is really stressing you out. And I want you to know that what you're feeling is very normal, that anybody in a new situation is going to feel pressure and stress, and especially when you've never done it before, or, you know, you have more assignments than you've ever been responsible for at one time. Recognizing that the struggle is real and normalizing that is really important. Keeping that open dialogue is also extremely important. And whether that is, you know, I know sometimes when I'm discussing things that are a little touchy with my kids, if I text them, I might get a more honest response, or at least an opening to the conversation, as opposed to being face to face, you know, eye to eye. As I was saying before, perhaps it's just taking your kid out for a coffee or a walk, and sort of having that opportunity away from the rest of the family, away from other distractions, where you can sort of just get into how it's going, and how is it going for you, and what's happening. Again, we talk about being non-judgmental, so trying to keep your judgment of it out of it, but really being there to field questions, or to just to be that sounding board for the student. And this is the tricky one, as we were talking about before, helping your youth problem solve without doing it for them. So instead of telling them exactly what to do, asking questions, or presenting scenarios. Well, what do you think would happen if you looked at it this way? Or is there a different way that you can look at it? Or is there somebody that you can go to that you can get the answer to this question, or get some support? And then we want to talk about providing the resources. And we've got another slide about resources from the universities as well, but let's look at those resources. I think we can move on to the next one. Before we get to that place of struggle, at our RLS, we often talk about the struggle bus. You know, if you're on the struggle bus on a particular day, we're gonna rally around you, and we're gonna help you through that moment, whatever it is. But having a struggle plan is a term that Dr. Chavoshi used for our last webinar that I really liked, so I borrowed it, giving him credit. Having a struggle plan means thinking ahead, that, yeah, you know what? You may find yourself in the situation where it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you are melting down, and you're really overwhelmed by everything that you have to do. What are some things that you can put in place before that happens, so that you know who to turn to, or, you know, how to cope with it? It's almost a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're planning ahead, thinking that it might happen, and if it does, we have some strategies to cope with it. So knowing the different services that are on campus is really, really important. And this is something that you and your child can research well in advance. All the universities advertise their wellness centers and their student centers and their student support centers. And then also having some, phone line connection resources is good too. This one is Good to Talk, and we've put the information up there for you as well. We will be sending that in our handout as well. All of these phone number and website resources will be included. This is a post-secondary school helpline, and it's for mental health. It's for all sorts of things. You've got a list in front of you on the screen, but it's a good place if a kid doesn't feel that they're able to talk to their parent at that moment, they have somewhere to turn. And, some subjects are really touchy, as we said before. A parent's expectations, a child doesn't want to disappoint their parents, or they feel that they've done something that, they're not comfortable discussing just yet. Let's at least go somewhere. Encourage your kids to talk to somebody, whether it's a trusted friend or another relative, whoever it is, allow them to reach out to whomever they need to speak with. Okay, let's take a look at the next page. So some of the other things that we want to talk about in terms of successful transition is, as we were saying, being familiar with all of the on-campus services that are available. And that definitely includes the orientation. For this year, a lot of kids had their virtual orientations in August or early September. And some of those virtual orientations led to some smaller in-group things, depending on what programs you were in and where you were. But the other piece of the puzzle is really getting to know the wellness centers and getting to know the student support centers. So I would suggest that you actually, make it a task of your child to research those things and then tell you where they can find certain things so that you know that they know where to find them. Another huge aspect of a smooth transition is getting involved. Joining clubs, joining organizations, joining the sports teams, anything that is going to allow a student to be more connected. Now, of course, in the virtual learning space, it's more difficult, but the universities are trying their best to make things inclusive so that kids are getting to know each other and they are able to start forming some bonds, those typical college and university bonds that we know from a multitude of movies. And the other thing I would talk to your kids about is really promoting self-care and that idea of getting some physical exercise. We talked about it in terms of a brain break and a body break, but regular exercise, good sleep hygiene, relaxation, meditation, putting on an app, like Headspace or one of the meditation apps is really important to help keep us centered and to help keep us focused, but also to restore ourselves so that we can get back to balance and then attack the next situation. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment and go to the chat. And if there's anything else, so I'm just jumping back a bit. Patrick said that he found that their tools are digital. The Rocket Books tools are digital, and thank you, Patrick, for putting that in there. Does anybody else have any questions or comments at this point in terms of what we've been talking about and our mental health, our kids' mental health, our ability to let go and to move things forward? I'll give you a moment to put that in the chat too. It's such a momentous time. I mean, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking back to my son who made that transition, and all of the angst and the anxiety and the unknown. And we know that there's an extra layer of unknown at this point. But I do know that, in those moments, so when he first started he was at U of T. And in those first few months, most of first year, anytime, he started a new course, we sat down, the two of us, over a cup of tea, and we went through the syllabus and we looked at all of those pieces, and we got excited about it too, because I was like, oh my gosh, you love this subject. This is going to be so cool for you, or I can't wait for you to study this because then I'll learn some more new stuff. And I tried to make it more of an open conversation than a lesson in prioritizing and understanding how to use the calendar. But he needed that. At that point, his executive functioning skills were not as developed as they are now. And he really needed somebody to take him sort of page by page and help him to lay that out. It didn't last for his whole university career because, we sort of front loaded it in the first few semesters, and then he was able to do it on his own. Okay, no questions, no comments. All right, I'm waiting for some at the end. Oh, here comes one. Thank you, Ronit. Everything you've said makes enormous sense to us as adults, but how do we get our teenagers to appreciate this and put it in practice? How do we avoid them thinking it's another bit of advice from their parents? Oh, Ronit, you are so wise and so true. It's so true. I think from my experience and my experience with other parents and our students going through these transitions on a regular basis, taking the time out so that it's not just another thing on the to-do list that we're sort of shouting at our kids to do, and have you done this, and have you done that, and have you done this. Having the opportunity to take a moment to step back and look at it as a conversation and ask questions like, what are you most looking forward to about this new year? What is the thing that's like scaring you the most? Or what is the thing that you think you'll be the most prepared for? What is the thing you'll be the least prepared for? And then trying to get that conversation going. It's hard. I can't pretend that it's easy. I really can't, because I've been through it, and we go through it with our students all the time. So it happens in stages, and I think you kind of also have to have the right moments. Grab an opportunity when you see it, in terms of a quiet moment, to have that quick conversation. And the other thing I would suggest is not to belabor it. So if you get the sense that the timing isn't right, the kid is getting annoyed, that it's just not working, before it escalates to be, a meltdown, take a step back and just say, you know what, I'd love to. We can talk about this another time. It's good. Let's move on, right? So my experience is taking it in small chunks, and I'd love to hear, if anybody else has any suggestions in terms of how they've gotten their kids to open up. Put it in the chat. Let's have a little conversation. All right, I'll wait for those. Renate says, I model self-care, sleep, hygiene, and exercise to my kids, but for some reason, they think it's just something that mom does. They can't seem to get it about the importance of getting enough sleep or asking for help before it becomes overwhelming. I know. I've been there at the same exact space where you're like, well, it's 11 o'clock and I'm going to bed now because I'm tired. And maybe you should go to bed too before your eyes fall out of their sockets. I think part of it is also, a little bit of rebellion. Like, I don't want to go to bed now because you've told me to go to bed now. And I think when our kids are, as we are doing that gradual release of responsibility, and our kids have more opportunities to have to monitor themselves, it's kind of like, okay, I'll go back to a baby story that my mother-in-law tells me. She was a very young mother. She was like, I don't know, she got married really early and she had her kids really early, like 20. And she was very young and very nervous. And her first son, when she was 20 years old, was not eating enough, not eating well enough, not eating enough. And she was concerned. And she called the doctor and said, my son's not eating, my baby's not eating, and I don't know what to do. And the doctor said, don't force feed him. When he's hungry, he'll eat. And that was really like, what? But I have to feed him. I'm the mother. I have to feed him. And the doctor said, no, you don't have, you know what? Wait, if he's not eating now, wait a half an hour and he'll be a little hungrier. And if he's not eating then, wait another half an hour and he'll be a little hungrier. And she tried the experiment, and sure enough, she didn't force feed him. And within the hour and a half, he was hungry enough to eat everything and she felt satisfied. I'm putting it back to that because I'm thinking that, you know, there will be a point where our kids realize that, oh my gosh, I feel terrible this morning because I was up till 2 in the morning. And I don't know if I want to do that again. But our teenagers, their brains don't work as clear-headedly, let's say, as rationally as our adult brains do. That's part of that executive functioning piece of it. And they don't always see the consequences of their actions too far into the future. So, it's very tricky. Um, and as Patrick says, let them have little fails. Exactly. So it's a controlled environment, right? Where you're allowing them to fail or to kind of sink a little before you swoop in and you help them, because there is no other way for them to learn. And that's just the truth of it. And we as helicopter parents, and I can count myself as one of them in certain situations, that we do have to step back, because we cannot be there for every moment of their lives once they're into that next transition. And it's not healthy for us and it's not healthy for them. So we have to find the situations where it's okay to say, okay, you're not hungry or you don't want to go to sleep. That's fine. You still have to wake up at 7 in the morning because we got to get to school on time. So you may, if you feel rotten tomorrow morning, you'll kind of understand where that's coming from. Okay, I'm going to jump to Patrick's question. Given your experience, how important is it for students to be able to identify their learning style to be a self-directed learner? Oh, thank you, Patrick. So important. So important. The work that we do a lot of work with our kids on their learning style and identifying what their learning needs are, and reflecting on what's working for them and what's not working for them. So we have a lot of conversations. Those are sort of the metacognitive conversations about what's working. How did that assignment go? What were the things that you did for that assignment that caused you to be the most successful? What were the things that you could do differently next time so that you will feel more comfortable with it, and you will either be more efficient with your time, or you will stress less. So we look at it from a reflective perspective, where we want our kids to reflect on what they're doing. And we also look at it from a growth mindset, which is we didn't do it now. We didn't do it for this time, but we can apply a new rule or a new skill for next time. And then we're going to do an experiment. We're going to try it for next time and see if it makes that easier. So I totally think that having an understanding of how you work best, what works for you, and being able to experiment with these things before you get to university is crucially important. Yes, thank you for that question. Any surveys or digital tools to start that conversation with a child helps with parent support? Yes, there are a number of learning style determinants. So surveys that help you determine what your learning style is. And when we talk about learning style, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's we look at a learner as everybody has different strengths. Some people have learn best or process information best by looking at it visually. So I was talking about that before. They read charts really well. They read maps really well. They look at things, and they can see color coding, and they really appreciate having things in a visual form. Other individuals are more tactile. They need to do it. They need to be hands-on. They need to move things around. They need to touch things. They need to take, something physical, cut it up, and then move the pieces around, or use their mouse to move the pieces around. So there are various types of learning styles. And I think Joelle can tell us if we have a resource that we've used most recently. And if not, we can send it out in a separate email if we haven't added it to our handout already. But it's a great place to start a conversation, which is do it for everybody. Everybody in the family can assess their learning style, and then you can apply that to, what's working and what's not working. And let's try some new techniques to see if we can make your life easier. Okay, let's get to the last section, and we're moving on. Let's see. Learning exceptionalities. So, our students who have learning exceptionalities, for those who have been diagnosed, they will most likely have had an IEP, which is an individual education plan that has followed them through high school. And that same individual education plan will be on their transcript or record, and it will follow them into university. So a few things about that. number one, if your child does have an IEP, you want to make sure that for their grade 11 and 12 year, that you kind of stack it with as many things on there that you think might possibly be helpful for university, even if they're not currently using them. So some accommodations might be time and a half on tests, having somebody to read their exam questions to them, or being able to take their exams on a computer as opposed to handwriting them. So anything that you think might be helpful for them at the university level, you want to make sure is on their IEP at the grade 11, preferably the grade 12 level, so that it carries through without too much re-investigation. The other really important piece is that your child must have a current psychoed evaluation, and current is usually within 2 years. So the other piece of the puzzle is that if you're going to have your child reassessed, let's say when they're in grade 11 or 12, which is a good time to do it, you want to make sure that they are 17, because at 17, they are now being asked to do the adult questions as opposed to the child questions. And that's what the university wants to see. They want to see an assessment from age 17 and up, because they're looking at it from the psychoed, the adult version of the psychoed. That's what they need for their information. There are some universities that will accept psychoed within 5 years previous, but most are looking for within 2 years previous. The other thing to remember about psychoeds, if you're doing them privately, is that there can be a waiting time of anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to 6 to 8 months, depending on who you want to do the psychoed. And then once you get your appointment, there's usually a 2 to 3 month waiting period between doing all the testing and then getting all the results back. So just in terms of prioritizing and planning, time management, you want to make sure that you leave enough room so that that can be done. Don't wait till the summer before university to redo the psychoed. Also, a big tip would be to reach out to the universities that you're thinking of applying to and have a conversation with their accessibility service office. All colleges, all universities, all post-secondary have this accessibility office, and they have an accessibility officer who will talk to you and give you lots of pointers and tell you what accommodations would be available to your particular child. All right, Patrick says, good point. Thank you very much, Patrick. Let's look at the next slide. Next, great. So here is an example of a really great guide. It's called transitionresourceguide.ca, and it goes through every Canadian university, I believe. I believe it's Canadian, not just Ontario. Might just be Ontario. I'll have to double check on that. But it goes through all of the universities, and it tells you what services are available at each university. So if your child has a short list of universities that they want to go to, and they've got some particular learning needs or physical needs that they need to get some support for, then be proactive. Look at the universities first and figure out not just is the program right, but are the accessibility accommodations available as well. So I really like this guide. So definitely take a look. We put that in the handout as well.